to episode number 42 of the Customer Secret Podcast. My name is Tim Van Milligan. Today, what's been on my mind is the future of typing people. And the reason this came up was because I was watching videos of other people typing people on YouTube, and they always seem to get it wrong. And I say that because I've been doing this a long time now, and I type people really fast. And I was watching one video, and the woman on it was saying, yeah, it takes me about 100 videos to watch of a single person before I can type them. And I had typed her in like 10 seconds on her first video. She was an ENFP. The problem that people have with typing others is they lose the tree because of the forest. They can't see the individual trees because they're trying to look at the entire forest. And what happens is there's basically two ways of typing people that people currently use. The first way is the oldest way, and that's based strictly on trying to look at the four dichotomies in Myers Briggs and trying to look at them each individually. Okay, so is this person an introvert or an extrovert? Is this person a sensing or an intuitive? Is this person a thinker or a feeler? Or in the final dichotomy, are they a judger versus perceiving? And that way it doesn't seem to be in vogue anymore. It still works, but it's like all the other ones, it takes a lot of time. The other method that is currently in vogue that everybody is enamored with, and it's very attractive and it's like very cognitive, is typing based on the cognitive functions. And I understand the lore of this. But this is where the forest is, and they can't see the trees because of the forest of the cognitive functions. The cognitive functions, there's 8 cognitive functions, and they can get very deep. And not only that, there's a specific ordering of the cognitive functions. And there's 8 levels deep. There's 8 cognitive functions, so there's 8 ordering in there. So it gets complicated really fast. And so that's the forest, and it does work. I'm not saying that it doesn't work. I'm just saying it's very inefficient, and it's very confusing because you have to take a long time to try to figure out which cognitive function the person is displaying, and then in which order in their cognitive stack. So the issue that everybody, basically, what I'm trying to say is that both trying to type somebody based on their preferences, the 4 preferences, the 4 dichotomies, or based on the cognitive functions, when it comes down to it, it's all based on behavior, which makes sense. Because most people define personality as behavior. But here's the problem, and this is where it gets into why people are so attracted to the cognitive functions. Because when you determine what is the definition of behavior, it is consistent actions. So you have to display consistent actions over a period of time for it to be considered a behavior. because the opposite of a behavior is a one-off event. And you hear this a lot, particularly in when people are going to court. They say, this is not my typical behavior. This is a one-time event. This is never going to happen again because I never do this. So you have to determine, is it consistent or is it just a one-time event? I go deeper. I go to, okay, what is a behavior? And so a behavior, as I said, is a set of consistent actions. So if we go a little bit deeper and say, what drives our actions? And what drives our actions are our decisions. So decisions just derive our actions. Consistent actions is a behavior. And what we term as personality is, a shortcut of describing behavior. So there's a link between personality and decisions. And this is where the cognitive functions come in, because what cognitive functions do is try to describe decisions by saying how people make decisions. So if you, and what I've heard one person say is that this is, cognitive functions is the thought process of a person. So it's how a person makes decisions. Now, the problem with trying to do that is, like I said, it takes a long time. And you're trying to map a thought process on somebody. And I understand the allure of it, because the purpose of trying to map somebody's thought process is to predict what a person is going to do in the future based on their thought process. And it all comes back to, what is the purpose of understanding personality? And this same woman that I typed earlier, the ENFP, and she said, why I want to learn personality is to better communicate with others. I am an engineer, and if you've heard my other podcasts before, that word better drives me nuts, because what does that mean, to be a better communicator? And nobody explains this to me. So I have to theorize what they mean by when they say better communicator. And what I think they mean is, not only to understand other people, because do you really, in the grand scheme of things, understanding other people, okay, I can understand where you're coming from, but what we really want is to convey our own thoughts so that the other person understands it better. So they understand, there's that word, better. So they understand us more completely, so they don't take our words, they don't misread what we say. This happens to me all the time. I'll ask a person a specific question, and it's a yes or no question. It's like, did you go over there? And then they start answering a completely different question. And it's not a yes or no answer. It's like, it was raining, so I had to, and it had no bearing on, did you go over there? Is this a simple yes or no question? I don't understand why people do this. They want to be better communicators. So why do they answer a different question that I didn't ask? It just mystifies me. Everybody does it. And so anyway, so when they're saying they're a better communicator, what they want to be is to better persuade other people on what their motives are, and to get that other person to agree with them. So really, communication is all about persuading other peoples to our line of thought and having them adapt our line of thought. So if that is the definition of better communication, as in persuading others, I think they've got it wrong. I don't care how they process, their thought process is. I think a better way of doing this is how, not how they process, it's why they process. And this opens up a whole new way of typing somebody. Because instead of trying to figure out how they process information, we ask the question why they made that particular decision. And this is the future of typing. In fact, this has been going on now for probably, I don't know how long Facebook has been around or how long Google has been around. Almost 20 years. So what they do is they don't track your thought process, they track your decisions. And when you track your decisions, now you kind of figure out why people make future decisions. So imagine Netflix, and you have to pick a movie. And Netflix wants to keep you on their system as long as possible. It's the same with Google. It's the same with Facebook. They want to keep you on their platform as long as possible. And so how do they do it? They have to serve up content that you will click on. And if the content is not something you're going to click on, you're going to click away from them and go find something that you will click on. And so what they do is they track your clicks. And when you make a click, what you're doing is you're making a decision. And that decision is determined by what you value. You know, you got a choice of 2 movies to watch. Well, which one do you want to watch? You want to watch the one that's more valuable to you or the one that's less valuable to you? And the choice is always obvious. You're always going to make the one that's more valuable. And so the more you click on different movies or click that like button in Facebook, they're tracking that. And they say, oh, this is valuable to you. So therefore, what we're going to do in the future is we're going to serve content that is very similar to that you just liked. Facebook does it, LinkedIn does it, Google does it. They're tracking your decisions. And why you made that decision is because that decision was more important. It had higher value to you. So the future has been going on for the last 20 years. They're tracking your why you made that decision. And the reason why was because it was more important. And there is an algorithm in Facebook that you can give them permission to look at all your likes, and based on all your likes, everything you've clicked on and everything that you didn't click on, that's also tracked. They can tell you what your personality is with very high accuracy based on what you have liked, the why you make your decisions. And in fact, they are making money on this. And that's why it's the future. You know, if you're not already tracking why somebody is making decisions, you're missing out on a boatload of information and money that you could be making. Instead, you're trying to figure out how they're making decisions, where you should be figuring out why they make that decision. And it always comes back to values. And in fact, in 2016, and most people completely have forgotten about this already, but in 2016, there was a company that was hired by one of the candidates. And what they did was they formed a company, and the company was called Cambridge Analytica. And what Cambridge Analytica did was they went into Facebook, and this was before Facebook locked it down, and they scrubbed millions and millions of people's data, everything that they liked. And from that, they figured out their personality. And then once they had their personality, what they did was they started creating ads specifically based on why people would choose one candidate over another. And they fed each person back individualized ads for their candidate based specifically on their personality type. And they used the big 5. So instead of using the 16 types of Myers Briggs, they used the 32 types of the big 5. So they went even more granular. And they attribute this to winning the election. And they won. They pulled it off where nobody thought that they had a chance. Nobody thought that they had a chance. And when Facebook got word of this, they were livid because Facebook backed the other candidate. So what they did was they locked it down. So basically, Facebook no longer allows anybody to have access to user data on what people like. But that data is out there. That train left the station a long time ago. There's other companies that are tracking the same thing. Every time, and it's ad tracking software. Every time if you click on an ad anywhere, it's tracked. It may not be Facebook. It's some other company that's gathering this data on what you like. And from that, they know your personality. And then once they know your personality, they're going to feed you back what you like. And this is where persuasion comes in, being a better persuader. So if you want to be a better persuader, you need to feed the person in front of you what they like. Yes. So how do you start tracking what somebody likes? And this is where I had to do the process myself. I had to start tracking each of the personality types and then figuring out what they liked. And then it gets really confusing because there's an infinite number of things that people like. So you have to start narrowing down the categories of things people like. And this is where I made the big discovery that there are basically 4 categories of values. I call them the 4 Ps. There's people. We value people. And Facebook tracks this. This is your friends. Anybody that you consider your friends, they're going to track. Linkbook does the same thing. Anybody in your network, they track. The second one is your possessions. The things that you buy. These are the physical things around you. If you have an automobile, what kind of automobile? What's the age of the automobile? They're tracking that as well, all your purchases. I go to the grocery store and I scan my little shopper's card every time. And the reason I do it is because once a month, this is the Kroger brand. They do this really well. They track your purchases and then they go to the manufacturer and they say, hey, this guy's been buying these things all the time. Do you want to have them continue to buy them? if you do, give them a discount, give them a coupon. And so once a month, the Kroger brand of stores, they send me a coupon book, and it's specifically for me, specifically the things that I buy, and they give me discounts on them so that I buy them again in their store rather than going to the Walmart store and buying them there. So it saves me money. It gets me into the Kroger store, buying their products. It's a win-win situation. Again, if you want to persuade somebody, give them what they want. So that's the second P. The third P is your passions. What are those things that you are passionate about? And this is a broad category. So this is things like your sports teams that you follow. It might be your hobbies. This is the non-physical things. The other category is possessions. The passions is the non-physical. The things that you like. It might be movies. And so this is where Netflix comes in, because they're tracking your preferences of non-physical items, your movies. And then the fourth category is your guiding principles. So this is the P for principles. So people, possessions, passions, principles. So this is where personality comes in, because people with the same personality temperament have very similar guiding principles. So when I started tracking people's values, this fourth category is what you want to track. I don't want to say how people make decisions. Why they make decisions are based on their guiding principles. For me, I am an ISTJ, so that puts me into the temperament I call the logisticals. So a logistical person, one of the things we value is logistics. The step-by-step sequence of things and how they're done. So that is a value. So I want to track that one. And then there's other values. And so each of the temperaments has a cluster of values that are very similar between one person with that same temperament and another person with that same temperament. And so I categorized them, and I more or less 20 some different values for each of the four temperaments. And the four temperaments, if you're unfamiliar with them, this comes out of David Kersey's book, Please Understand Me, and his second book that he wrote, Please Understand Me, number 2. He breaks down the Myers Briggs system into the four temperaments, and this is brilliant. So in Myers Briggs, you have the four dichotomies. The four dichotomies, the first one is the E versus I, introvert versus extrovert. The second one is intuition versus sensing, so that's N versus S. The third one is thinking versus feeling. And then the fourth one is perceiving versus judging. And so then the four temperaments are not those four dichotomies, but it's a combination of two letters. And first off, you take that first E versus I and you just throw it away. Say, nope, we're not gonna use that one at all to define people. We're gonna take the other three ones. N versus S, T versus F, and J versus P. And we're going to arrange them and come up with four types of people. And so the four types are NTs, the intuitive thinkers. Then you have the NFs, the intuitive feelers. Then you have your SJs, like myself, which are the sensing judging. And then you also have the sensing perceiving. And so it's kind of weird. You're taking three letters and grouping four people, but it works out really well because now within those four groups, the values are very consistent. And so now when I'm typing somebody, this is where it gets back to the future of typing. When I'm typing somebody, I'm looking for one of those temperaments. And the thing about temperaments is they are easy to pick up if you have the right metaphors to describe the people. And I think Kersey, in his book, he uses, for the NFs, he calls them the idealists. In the SPs, he calls the artisans. And the SJs, he calls the guardians. And so what he's trying to do is to describe behavior. And I think this is where it kind of breaks down. Because again, when you're typing somebody based on behavior, it takes a long time because you have to determine, is that behavior consistent? Is it consistent actions, or is it a one-off event? If you're just meeting a person for the first time, you have no history, so you don't know if it's consistent. So it's got to be, you got to treat it as a one-off event. And so you can't make that assumption that somebody's being consistent. Where if you look at values are a one-off event because every decision you make is always a choice between something more valuable or less valuable. And so now if you're typing somebody's based on values, you can say, yeah, this is definitely somebody that, values logistics, like in myself. So now I have so what that does is if you can pick up that, you got two of the letters in their 4-letter code of their Myers Briggs. And it's the most important two. Their temperament, because their temperament drives their values. And so, like Kersey, he's using metaphors like artisan and guardian and idealist. Those are trying to describe behavior. What I use is different metaphors to describe people, not trying to describe behavior, but metaphors that describe an occupation. Because if you're describing an occupation, it just flows into your mind all the values that person must have to be in that occupation. And so I break it up into 4 occupations, but they're all related to each other. So it's not like men are from Mars, women are from Venus, and you got different planets that they're completely different. And because they're on different planets, they shouldn't have kids because they're separated by these far away distances. But they do have kids, they do intermarry. So you need a system that says, okay, we got a group of people, let's call this group something. And then within that group, we need occupations that relate to the entire group. And so what I use is I say the entire group is called the army. And I call them the human army. And this is trademarked, so you can't use it without referencing me. So in the human army, we have 4 occupations. And so for the purpose of the army is to fight and survive wars, because that's what we do. The unfortunate thing is that is the history of humanity. We are constantly fighting each other. And so in order to survive this conflict, we have organized ourselves as an army. And this is brilliant, because if you organize your people in specific tasks or different occupations, you have a better chance of surviving. You can't have all your people being in one section of the army, because if everybody is in one section, the army is not effective at all. And so the four sections that I use to describe people are, you have the logisticals, like myself, our purpose is to provide and manage the resources for the Army. But just having resources doesn't mean you're going to win a war. You need somebody to take the battle to the enemy, and these are your warriors. And I call the logisticals, I'm the SJ. The warriors are the SPs. They're sensing and perceiving type people. We could go really deep here, but let's continue on. And then the third group is your strategists, because every army needs somebody that is going to create a battle plan. Because the problem is that no matter how many warriors you have and no matter how much resources you have, it's never enough, because you never know if your enemy that you're fighting against is going to have more warriors and more logisticals. And I always think of these doomsday, planet invasion movies that you see, where the invaders coming to Earth have more weapons, they have more soldiers, they have more resources, and they completely obliterate humanity except for the few that survive. And this is the plot of the hero's journey of so many science fiction movies. You're just overwhelmed, but you have special people within your army that we call them special. And some of those special people are your strategists, and this is the third group. And these are your NTs. And what your NTs do is they can take the limited resources that you have and the limited number of warriors that you have, and they can deploy them in a very effective way. They are the force multiplier. So they take what you have and they increase it. And this is the purpose of the strategist in the Army. So these are your NTs. And then finally, you need a fourth group of people in your Army. And it's kind of like a caregiver, but it's more than just medicine and treating the wounded, because modern medicine is actually modern. We've been fighting each other for millennia. So our need, obviously we needed healthcare, but it was primitive healthcare. If you, in the past, if you broke your arm, there was a good chance you might die, because especially if it's a compound fracture where the bone comes up through the skin, now you got disease that can get in, and then plus you got inflammation in the arm. And the bone needs to be reset, and if the bone is not reset properly, you got complications, and that's why you could die. So modern medicine, it's only been since like the 1700s where we've been setting bones. And then there's all kinds of other diseases and injuries. If you get pierced by a spear, you got internal organ damage. And that internal organ damage has only been, maybe since the Revolutionary War in the 1700s. And we've been fighting each other long before the 1700s, and there wasn't surgeons back then. So our caregivers had a different job before then. So before that time, the task of the caregivers was to provide courage to the Army. Because if your warriors don't engage in the battle is lost. So you're like, okay, you got these four groups of people, and the warriors are the ones that take the fight to the enemy. And all of a sudden they get scared and they take off. So what happens to the other three? They're defenseless. So the other army is just going to overrun them and then wipe them out. So you need courage for your warriors. And that is the purpose of that fourth group. They are the encouragers for the Army. They provide courage. They provide motivation. And if the NFs, that's this group, that is their purpose for humanity. They are constantly worried about somebody's mental health. They are constantly worried about their morale. And because of that, I call them the morale officers. It's a position, it's an occupation within the Army, is the morale officers. So you have the 4 types. You have your strategists, your morale officers, your logisticals, and your warriors. And each of these are the 4 temperaments. And if you can, when somebody comes at you, another person, and you need to type them, my first thing is, okay, if I had to assign this person to one of the positions in the Army, which of those 4 occupations would I assign them to? And then so I say, okay, if they're going to be, they are all about encouragement and my mental health and my mental well-being and my morale. Okay, that person I'm going to assign to the morale officer category. Now that I've got them assigned, now instantly I know they're a 2-letter code for them. They are the NFs. And now all I need to figure out, are they judging, perceiving, introvert, extrovert? But the most important one is that temperament, because temperament drives your decisions because of your values. And if you want to be a better communicator, like I said, what you have to do is provide the other person things or content that is valuable to them. And that's all about temperament. So if you figure out somebody's temperament, now you have a strategy for providing content that they will find valuable. And now you have a way of persuading somebody. Now, this was a very complicated podcast. And if you want it in a more systematic approach, more logistical, where I have, I created a course, and in the course there's visuals where right now you're just looking at my head or just listening to my voice. So I created a course that will walk you through this step by step, breaking it down. Basically, what you're doing is the same thing that artificial intelligence is doing. You're looking at somebody's values, you're typing them, and then you're giving back to them what they value. And that is where persuasion is. So it's a course about selling, but in actuality, it's a course about persuasion. And how you use that persuasion doesn't really matter, because it's the same technique either way you do it. You can use this for getting a job, persuading that interviewer to hire you. You can use it for attracting that special someone in your life, your future mate. You can use this for attracting a business partner. You can use it for persuading your kids. Doesn't matter. It's all the same technique. First, find out their personality type. From their personality type, what do they value? And then 3, give them what they value. Talk about what is important to them and why they should take this decision. So you're describing the reason why they should make that decision using their own values, their own guiding principles. It's a simple system, but where it's hard is that people try to make it too hard by using things like the cognitive functions and behavior, trying to figure out how people make a decision rather than why they make a decision. So we're going to leave it at that. If you're interested in this course, I will leave a link to it in the show notes. So you can just click on it and it will take you to, and I'm trying to get people to take it. So I've priced it really reasonable, because this is the future. And I'm tired of seeing people say, I want to be a better communicator. they don't know how to be a better communicator. They don't know the step-by-step sequence. I'm presenting it in a logistical fashion to get you from point A to point B as quickly as possible without taking detours, going down the cognitive function path. It's a very long and windy path that's not going to get you to being able to persuade somebody faster and more effective. So this has been episode number 42. We'll see you in episode number 43 of the Customer Secrets podcast. And if you want to go more information, customersecrets.com.